Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, September 22nd, 2015 here, and I want to clarify for everybody because I'm getting a lot of emails saying the podcasts at GCN have the wrong show. No, they don't. Yesterday's show was unable to happen because we used Skype to connect my little tiny studio here on the island of Oahu with the GCN control room, and so we couldn't make the connection, and we just decided we're going to replay a show from a week ago because that's really the only option that we had here. And so for those of you listening to this podcast, the reason yesterday's podcast seemed wrong, that was why. We didn't have a show. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, this Skype outage hit only the home users. The business accounts were left untouched. That may be significant. I'll explain in a little while. But Skype was down for users all around the world. They didn't get it back up and running until late last night. And everybody's saying, what's going on? Is the NSA adding more spyware from the lowest bidder, same people who did the Obamacare website? Maybe, maybe not, because Skype has already stated they want to add advertising to the free users of Skype. Now, if you have a business account or you buy Skype credit, you're not going to see it, but they're starting to pop ads up on the window for audio-only calls. And this morning, since signing into Skype, I got a whole bunch of junk sales phone calls ringing my Skype account continuously. So looks like Skype is out there trying to monetize their system. Now, at the same time, of course, we've had a lot of weird outages over the last several days. Amazon's web service went down, knocked out Amazon, Tinder, IMDb, Netflix. Now, Netflix was able to recover because their IT design allows for the possibility that their provider, Amazon Web Services, was going to go down, so they were able to get through it. Before, over the weekend, we had Twitter went down. And why is the Internet breaking so much? Is it simply the decay in our infrastructure as we sink into third world fascist economic decay and disorder? Or is there a sudden rush to put more spyware, backdoors, and gates for the benefit of the government onto our structure, and they're making hideous mistakes while they do it? We're not sure, but obviously the reliability of American IT services is very much in question right now, which is only going to accelerate other countries away from using any American IT hardware, software services, and develop their own. We'll talk about that a little bit more later in the show, but we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Welcome back. What's your response to the B-61 tactical nukes, the 20 of them that are bringing into Germany? Is this a response to Russia moving stuff into Syria?
It's not a response. It is an outright threat. These are major city-killing nuclear weapons the United States is positioning in Germany, and there's an implied threat that if Russia doesn't back down and let the U.S. do what the U.S. wants to do, that the situation could escalate to nuclear war, and the U.S. is basically rattling their nuclear saber right now.
Yeah, because did you hear anything about the Russia sending out drones to do reconnaissance?
Yes, I heard that yesterday. Russia, their forces in Syria are already sending out drones to do reconnaissance. Plus, of course, Russia has their own surveillance satellites that are looking at the situation. And with the forces Russia has already on the ground, they've got 14 Su-24s, 14 Su-25s. And once they pick out the actual real bases of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, it's not going to take them very long to smash that at all.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll find a NATO flag there.
Well, it's interesting. They've already captured some of the ISIS fighters. What these ISIS fighters are telling the Russians has not been revealed yet, but Russia said these ISIS forces in Syria have up-to-date satellite reconnaissance photos of Syrian army positions, the Russian positions, and of course the question is, since ISIS and Al-Qaeda do not have their own satellites up there, who is giving them this satellite intelligence with which to try and, oppose Russia?
The ISS network, huh?
Yeah, the ISS network. Rather, those gosh darn Iranian hackers hacked into the National Reconnaissance Office and stole those gosh darn satellite. Actually, they didn't need to do that. They just need to go on Hillary's email server and help themselves to all the satellite data they want. And
I just want to let you know,
exchange for a nice donation to the Clinton Charitable Foundation.
Yeah, her slush fund.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the anti-aircraft they brought in is the Panzer S-1 anti-aircraft system, which is very capable.
Yeah, it is, and there's also talk that Russia may be deploying the S-400 to Syria as well, which means they're going to be absolutely unstoppable. And the U.S. is trapped by their own propaganda, because the U.S. has been justifying their bombing of Syria by saying, we're only making war against the terrorist groups ISIS and Al-Qaeda, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And so Russia has gone into Syria at the invitation of the Syrian government to say, yeah, we're on your side. We're against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And at this point, the U.S. is thrashing around trying to get out of this mess of their own creation.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Now, apparently yesterday, Russia's embassy in Syria was shelled. Nobody was hurt. Gee, I wonder who would do a thing like that. And, of course, Russia is calling on the international community to denounce this attack on their embassy. Now, obviously, since Syria's government has invited Russia to be there, it isn't the Syrians or Assad who shelled the Russian embassy. Is it? It's the rebels. It's ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And I'm sure Russia's response will be swift and forthcoming. Now, over in Sana'a, Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign and Expatriates Minister Walid Muallim said Russia's coming into Syria is going to turn the tables on those who plotted against Syria. And he's absolutely right. This was never about ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They were just a manufactured excuse to perpetuate the 4-year campaign to get Bashar al-Assad out of Damascus and replace him with a Western puppet ruler. That's it. And everybody knows what's going on. It's almost pointless for the United States to try and continue the propaganda campaign. Nobody believes a thing they're saying. Everybody knows what the game really is. Now, Netanyahu had a meeting with Putin. They're up there screaming about, you can't help Syria. Syria is going to attack Israel. If you give Syria any more weapons, they will come after Israel. And, of course, Putin is saying that's utter nonsense. Syria's got problems within their own borders that they're dealing with. And so Netanyahu and Kerry and Obama are trying to find some way they can come up with a reason for Russia to leave Syria without giving away the fact that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are really working for the United States against Bashar al-Assad. Now, the scandal over the doctoring, if you will, the sexing up of the military intelligence on ISIS and Al-Qaeda produced by the U.S. intelligence agencies is continuing to explode. And basically, what the intelligence analysts who are paid to look at all this stuff were saying, that attacking ISIS wasn't going to have any effect. The airstrikes, as they were being carried out, which seemed to miss ISIS and Al-Qaeda and hit Syrian critical infrastructure, weren't working either. But apparently these intelligence analysts don't understand ISIS and Al-Qaeda are working for the United States government. And so now the fingers are pointing, no, I didn't change it. This other guy changed it. Go fire him. And they're trying to pass the buck on this one already. And they're in complete thrash mode. They're totally defensive. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And breaking news, the Pope has just arrived here in the United States, plane put down. Was met on the tarmac by the Obamas, and will meet with President Obama at the White House tomorrow. He's here for 6 days, 3-city visit, and I sure hope that he is wearing his Kevlar vestments, because I am very concerned that certain parties would love to shoot the poor guy and then frame some dumb Muslim patsy for it to try and get all the Christians wound up for a new unholy crusade against the Middle East. And it is an inviting target for certain interests here. So, Pope, keep your head down. Stay down. Okay? I know you've got a guaranteed entry into heaven, but hold it off for as long as you possibly can. All right, getting on back to the situation in Syria. Article coming out of the Daily Sheeple. The corporate media has finally been forced to acknowledge what has been all over the independent media for over a month. The top ISIS commanders in Syria were trained and funded by the United States of America at least as late as 2013. And the corporate media is trying to downplay it and say, well, he was on our side over here, and now he's not on our side, and really you've got to believe he's the enemy. He's a manufactured enemy, just like all of Al-Qaeda was. They created the enemy with all of these videos that were produced by a very professional unit with lots of special effects. It's the new Emmanuel Goldstein, a government-produced enemy for you to do your 2-minute hate at, on which is justified everything the government does, taking your money, taking your children for wars of conquest. Now, interestingly enough, on Saturday, John Kerry issued a statement that the U.S. was ready to negotiate with all of the various factions in Syria about resolving the crisis in Syria, and they were open to the idea of Assad staying on. And then Sunday, they reversed. Apparently, after talks with the British Foreign Secretary Phil Hammond in London, Kerry did a complete 180 and said Russia and Iran have to convince Assad that he has to go. And they're basically putting it on display. That's the U.S. agenda in Syria. It's not ISIS. It's not Al-Qaeda. It's getting Assad out and replacing him with a puppet ruler. And at this point, it almost seems like this is being driven more by ego. You know, by golly, we're going to do this because we want to do it, because everybody understands what's going on here. Another story over at RINF.com. Fairness and Accuracy in FAIR, the media watchdog, has documented how the New York Times has erased all the news stories they ever had about the CIA's attempts to overthrow Syria's government. And we're seeing that a lot, especially as the corporate media stops paper editions and goes to all electronic. They can go in and change their past archives. Again, right out of 1984. Have to change the past to make it line up with today's lies here. Latest polls, 81% of Syrians believe the U.S. created ISIS. I'm definitely one of those people. And here's a very good analysis over at Press TV. The United States never expected Russia to come into Syria. The entire plan by the U.S. to destabilize Syria and drive Assad out and lie about sarin gas and chlorine gas and the rest of it was all based on this assumption that Russia was going to sit this one out, even though Syria and Russia are allies and have been for quite some time. And according to this analysis, the U.S. was caught completely off guard by Russia's deployment to Syria. And certainly, looking at the way the propaganda has been thrashing around back and forth, that's an accurate assessment. They were literally blindsided by Russia saying, yes, we're going to come help you get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And even now, the American propaganda is starting to back away from ISIS and Al-Qaeda and say, well, yeah, really, our real agenda is Assad must go. And don't you dare get in the way of that. Now, Russia has begun drone surveillance missions in Syria. They have a credible air force on the ground in Syria. If Russia decides to move against ISIS and Al-Qaeda aren't going to be there for much longer. And here's where the U.S. is in serious trouble, because the U.S. very well can't give ISIS and Al-Qaeda air defense weapons able to deal with the Russian warplanes without giving it away that ISIS and Al-Qaeda were working for the United States all along. They're really caught. So the new propaganda now is that the U.S. has to go into Syria and may have to oppose Russia because Russia and Iran are coordinating. Russia's serving the Iranian interests here. It's all Iran's fault, and we know Iran's the bad guy. They're getting really desperate here. to try and find some propaganda device that is going to get you, the American people, to say, yeah, we're going to forget all about the lies and fraud and cover-ups we've seen to date. Yes, go ahead, take my money, take the lives of my children, and go and kill whoever it is we're supposed to be killing this week. France has announced that they claim a right to bomb Syria in self-defense. And their entire basis for that is the claim that they have intelligence that Syria is coming to commit acts of terror in France. And France needs to preemptively destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad. Now, with all the Syrian refugees flooding in, there's probably going to be some kind of problem, and France is already telegraphing. Whatever happens, they're going to blame it on Syria's government to justify war against Bashar al-Assad. The risk here is if France goes in to bomb where the Russians are and the Russians defend themselves and shoot down the plane, we're looking at war between the West and Russia. And there are parties in this country who'd love to see that. They want to go back to the glory days of the Cold War and, we've got to live in poverty so the U.S. can build all these wonderful weapons with which to deter the Russian Red Menace. I've heard all this stuff before, back in the 1950s. And it was a pile of garbage then, and it is a pile of garbage now. And the U.S. is starting to act desperate. The U.S. government, rather, is starting to act desperate. And we're seeing an article over in Journal Neo where it's saying Washington is losing the Middle East. Because all of these nations that were part of the petrodollar deal, they're starting to break away. They're starting to turn toward Russia and China for commerce. This is a major foreign policy meltdown on the part of the U.S. government. So we got to take another break for commercials. When we come on back, talking about China's new jet fighters and how capable they are. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, we have been talking about this horrible situation in the U.S. military-industrial complex where they have been sucking vast amounts of money out of the American people and putting them into these boondoggle weapon systems that really exist for no other reason than to justify all the money taken from you. We've talked about the F-22 still asphyxiating its pilots. They've had to artificially lower its service ceiling for that. The Independence-class littoral combat ships started corroding as soon as they were put into the water. We're hearing horror stories about the latest U.S. aircraft carrier, the Gerald R. Ford. It's loaded up with a whole bunch of whiz-bang gadgets, including electromagnetic catapults. They can't get those to work. And, of course, there's the F-35, which is the most expensive warplane ever developed. Can't fly in the fog, can't fly in the rain, can't fly near lightning. The helmet control fire system still does not work. The software for the onboard cannon won't be ready till 2019. And the Air Force finally admitted, after several disastrous exercises, that the F-35 can't dogfight. If it can't win with its whiz-bang missiles, it's going to be a sitting duck. And it's already gone up against the latest Russian jets in simulated war games and the Chinese jets. Now, China's new J-11D is a very advanced jet plane. It's China's copy of the Sukhoi 27 Flanker. And the Pentagon is saying, well, if they meet one-on-one, the F-35 can probably beat the J-11D. The problem is China is able to produce dozens of these things for the cost of a single F-35. China and Russia, when they spend money on weapons, the goal is cost-effective weaponry. And both Russia and China are able to produce far more of these aircraft for less money than the U.S. is spending. And they want to go into a war with Russia and China. They're not going to be able to win. They're not going to be able to win a conventional conflict with Russia and or China, and that means they will resort to those nuclear weapons, which they're already pre-positioning in Germany. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Michael in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Doing fine.
Okay. Well, I just tuned in and I caught into the tail end of, I guess, a comment you were making about the United States losing the Middle East. And I just find it kind of preposterous how some people think about the United States losing the Middle East whenever their own sovereign country. And that's what kind of bothers me. Like, that's kind of my whole issue. Like, anything that goes on in the Middle East. And as far as Syria, you have Bashar al-Assad. He was elected president twice.
Yes.
So, in the same thing, you got, Ahmadinejad, and then you had Hassan Rouhani that he was elected. So that's what kind of bothers me as far as, people making the commentary that losing certain countries whenever they're sovereign.
Well, what they're talking about, pardon me, is not direct political control, but economic sphere of influence. Now, at the end of World War II, everybody agreed the dollar was the global trade and reserve currency, and the U.S. financial system made a lot of money off of that. Because they would loan those dollars out for global commerce at interest, or they would get very favorable trade deals where people would send lots of agricultural produce and manufactured goods to get those pieces of ink and paper to play with. Then when the Federal Reserve was overprinting those tickets, France got wise, demanded they be exchanged for gold. Nixon said no. And in order to keep up global demand for the U.S. dollar, they embarked on the petrodollar deal, which is where they convinced all the nations of the Middle East, all the oil-producing nations, to sell their oil only for the U.S. dollar and invest those dollars in the U.S. economy, and in exchange, the U.S. would guarantee their military safety. Well, ever since 9/11, Israel has embarked on a new phase of aggression to where the nations of the Middle East no longer believe the U.S. can protect them militarily, because whatever Israel does, the U.S. government says, oh, yes, that's fine with us. Israel can go and do whatever they want to do. And the dollar, the dollar's in collapse, and this is why more and more countries are wanting to do business in currencies other than the U.S. dollar. And the United States got lazy on the petrodollar deal and the Bretton Woods deal. We've allowed our manufacturing to decline. Nobody wants our agriculture anymore because of the GMO disaster. And if the rest of the world stops using the dollar for global trade and banking, the U.S. economy is doomed. And that's what all these wars are about. Anytime any country wants to sell their oil for a currency other than the dollar, we scream weapons of mass destruction, we invade, we kill their leader, we put in a puppet ruler to guarantee that their resources are traded only for the U.S. dollar. We've done it in Iraq, we've done it in Libya, we're trying to do it in Syria, we're trying to do it in Yemen, and that's what is really driving all these wars. The U.S. wants to drag the world back to as it was in the 1950s. And the rest of the world is saying, no, we really don't want to do that.
Yeah, and just one other point I wanted to make before I let you go is another big thing that I had a problem with is a lot of people, they have like this false sense of infallibility of the United States, like Air Force. So we have the F-22, the F-35, which I think are both clunkers. And so what Russia did, I think, was brilliant. I don't know. I'm still a countryman. I'm still an American and whatnot. But what they did is they stationed, they didn't really come out and say that they stationed like the S-400 or S-300 in Syria. But that was the story that came out. They stationed their anti-air and anti-ballistic system. And then they actually stationed their Su-30 fighters out there. So anybody that thinks that the F-35 and the F-22 are going to have air superiority over Syria is completely mistaken now.
Yeah, so they are. I mean, first of all, they didn't even make as many of the F-22s as they originally were going to because it didn't perform. The F-35 is still technically not in active service. It's not really a chip in this game yet. I'm sure they're going to rush it forward and say, well, we've lowered the requirements, it's now combat ready, and they're going to send off a lot of American kids to get killed in that thing.
Oh, yeah, you're totally right. But I'll go ahead and let you go. I know you got probably other callers, and I love the show. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over here to Vincent in Colorado. Aloha, Vincent. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
Okay, great. There's a flashpoint, man. Freedom Flashpoint happening right now in Costilla County, Colorado. Basically what we've got is we've got a bunch of sheriffs that are violating their oaths of office. They're trespassing on people's property. They actually have code enforcement employing the sheriff deputies to come out and ask probing questions. They aren't actually charging anyone anything. People are asking these guys to leave, they're actually arresting people in front of a public meeting that happened last week. There were 2 meetings in recent days. There was a county commission meeting, and basically they had 8 chairs out.
Okay, you got 30 seconds. Got 30 seconds.
Okay, great. Yeah, they had 8 chairs out, and about 60 of us attended. There was 100 people at the next meeting, basically the fight is about rights versus code. And I need lots of support, and if somebody wants to contact me, there's a bunch of us on a Facebook group. You can get me on Skype at Vince Able World, and then you can also email me at gardenofeden@unseen.is. That's unseen.is, and I'm also on Twitter, and that's Vince Able World on Twitter as well. So, this is a flashpoint. If we could get a lot of national attention on this thing.
Sorry, I got to cut you off. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and certainly today the corporate media, it's all Pope all the time. I'm following this on Fox News, and apparently they're waiting for the Pope's first stop at the Holy Nunciature of the Holy See in Washington, D.C. I hope I got that right. And it's a security nightmare, wide open spaces, and apparently the Pope is eschewing some of the security precautions that were taken by his predecessors. He's apparently riding in regular Fiat, no armor, and apparently he's being quoted as saying, God brought me here and God will protect me. I sure hope he's right, because we have seen in this country this ramp up of, you must hate the Muslims propaganda. I mean, that's why they were trying to defend the school in this Ahmed Mohammed case. Because if it comes out Muslims are the victims of a propaganda witch hunt, which Ahmed Mohammed proved, then the whole hate Muslims starts to fall apart, and people start saying, what else are Muslims being blamed for that they didn't actually do? Maybe even 9/11 itself. So I wish him luck. I hope the Pope has a good time and goes home to Rome safely. But I wish he'd be a little bit more cautious and listen to his security people. Now then, up in Afghanistan, interesting little story. And I'm mentioning this because one of the bits of propaganda we're always hearing about these U.S. invasions is we're bringing the benefits of American civilization to this country. We're teaching them the American way of life. And then we hear this story out of the New York Times, no less, that U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan who are witnessing the sexual abuse of young boys by the Afghan troops have been ordered not to say anything about it. That's just what they're going to do. It's their culture. Don't say anything about it. So these are our friends, the ones who are supposedly our friends in Afghanistan, and they think sexually abusing little boys is just kind of a fun thing to do. Now, over in Dubai, not too long ago, there was this 33-year-old son of the Prime Minister and Vice President of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, died, and it was reported he died of a heart attack. Well, apparently that was a cover story, and the young man was actually killed by Yemeni terrorists who launched an attack. And I think the reason they may have tried to cover it up initially is they don't want anybody thinking that all of this war on Yemen might actually have repercussions within their own countries. That's something that's going to pull the enthusiasm out of supporting the proxy war in Yemen. Let's see. Kiev forces have violated the ceasefire 7 times over the last 24 hours in the Donetsk People's Republic, 12 times over the last 24 hours in Lugansk. So they're still out there. Russia has taken 20 children who were injured in these attacks for treatment up in Moscow, which is a very good thing for them to be doing. All right, let's take a phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Thanks for having me. I'm going back to the Syria situation and the influx of Russian military equipment and what have you. I was reading this story on INFOWARS, and it was talking about the jets that are stationed there, the Russian jets, and they were trying to compare an F-18 Hornet with this Su-35 SM.
Mm-hmm.
And seriously, I mean, you've got to be crazy. That's like comparing a Wells Fargo stagecoach to a Bentley Continental.
You know, I mean, let's give credit where credit is due. The F-18 Hornet is a very capable aircraft for its vintage, as it were. The problem is that in the rush to maximize profits, the military-industrial complex has just gone down this path of making big, bloated, huge machines, and a lot of them are very much out of date. They don't work as well as they were supposed to. Worse, they're out of context, because I noticed, you know, if you study the history of World War II, the U.S. went into World War II thinking the battleship was the mainstay of naval combat, and this thing called an aircraft carrier was just kind of a little side note. You know, yes, we've got them because other people have got them, but they're not that important. And, of course, World War II showed that the battleship was unfit for modern combat in the age of the aircraft carrier. Now our Navy is obsessed about aircraft carriers. And the problem is they're vulnerable in an age of smart missiles. And both Russia and China have got missiles specifically designed to hunt down and kill aircraft carriers. And they are far too fast and maneuverable for the Phalanx Sea Whiz to intercept. And there was that story that came out about a month ago where the Joint Chiefs got in one of the top Navy admirals and said, if we go to war with Russia and China, what is the life expectancy of our carrier battle groups? And the Navy guy said 2 weeks, maybe 3 if you keep them in port. And the U.S. is pouring in all kinds of money to these established weapons technologies, and they're outdated. And I think when if we are foolish enough to actually go to all-out war with Russia and China, it's going to be over very quickly.
Well, I'm looking at the situation from an outside point of view, and I remember that Putin said at the early part of this year, you know, if this thing goes the way it's going, we are going to put equipment into Syria that's never been seen outside Russia. And you know, the Panzer S-1 has never been seen outside Russia, and now the S-400 missile system that they have promised to deliver, that's going to make it very, very difficult for particularly, shall we say, that small nation at the eastern end of the Mediterranean to go in there willy-nilly and attack installations. So the whole situation has been changed. And Putin warned you, said, you know, this is what we're going to do, and he's done it.
Yeah, and again, the point that our corporate media continues to ignore is Syria's legitimate government has asked Russia for their help against the terrorists. Syria's legitimate government has not asked the United States or Israel or France to come on in and bomb the country into rubble. And that tells you who the bad guys are here.
Well, I think it tells you who the real terrorists are.
Yeah, well, we know who the real terrorists are working for. You know, it's all a fraud. Okay?
Yeah. And this thing was in Ukraine, which at one stage looked like it was going to be a pushover for the West, has also turned into a quagmire. You know, everything that's being done recently has just turned sour.
They are quagmires. I mean, when General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this war plan of the United States, it was all supposed to be over and done with in 2008. And here we are in 2015 heading into 2016, and the U.S. is mired in a third invasion of Iraq, a second invasion of Libya, second invasion of Yemen, still trying to get into Syria. You know, war with Iran is still not happening at all. And now we have the rest of the world understanding the real agenda behind all these U.S. aggressions. This policy has already failed. Unfortunately, our government is too far down the path, too caught up in their own self-image of glory and war, too much trapped by their own ego to turn around and say, okay, we made a mistake, let's just call this all off and try and settle things down. And Putin has outmaneuvered them time and time and time again, and he's going to go on doing it because he's a very pragmatic, experienced statesman, as opposed to all these costumed phonies the money junkies keep running for office in this country, all these friends of Israel.
Well, I think what we're looking at now is Russia is countering all these moves, and basically they're countering the moves until the American financial system, the Federal Reserve, private central banking.
I agree with you on that one, because we're still seeing all this propaganda that Syria could be Russia's new Stalingrad, and the U.S. said, yeah, we want to turn it into another Afghanistan for Russia, but they're risking Syria being the U.S. new version of Vietnam, and I think that's actually going to happen, and Russia's economy can win a war of attrition. The U.S. cannot.
Yeah, that was my conclusion, that Putin is trying to keep this thing going in a moderate way until the whole system collapses.
Yeah, he is. Now, we got to take a break for our top of the hour news. John, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We'll be back after the top of the hour news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And hour number 2, the phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And I want to talk a little bit about that story that we just heard on the news break about misdiagnosis, 1 in 20, because it happened to me twice. Early last year, when I was ill and I went to outpatient care, and they told me I had a simple upper respiratory infection. Take this over-the-counter medicine, you'll be fine. And I got worse, and I wound up having to go to the emergency room. They told me I had lung cancer. And it wasn't until a day later, after all the tests, that they finally realized I had pneumonia, and by that time it had gotten so serious I wound up in the hospital for 10 days. They make a lot of mistakes out there, don't they? Now, speaking of mistakes, and stepping back to this situation in Syria, Obama's Islamic State war czar is stepping down. General John Allen, who was supposed to be in charge of the war against ISIS in Syria and Iraq, he is stepping down. And what this is pure politics. Obama and Kerry are still trying to maintain the illusion that who they're fighting in Iraq and Syria is ISIS and Al-Qaeda, rather than the people of Syria and the people of Iraq who do not want to live under U.S. puppet rule. So they're going to throw this guy to the wolves, sacrificial lamb to keep the story looking good, and nobody is buying that anyway. Over in Great Britain, the fury over Jeremy Corbyn is continuing unabated, where, according to Rupert Murdoch's Sunday Times, a British general, whose name was not shared, is predicting that should Jeremy Corbyn be elected Prime Minister, the army will mutiny and stage a military coup to keep Jeremy Corbyn from 10 Downing Street. That is how afraid they are of this guy. Now, one of the reasons they hate Corbyn so much, over at his own website, jeremycorbyn.org.uk, he has a speech that he gave on the situation in Palestine. And basically pointing out it is impossible for anybody to recognize the state of Israel as long as Israel refuses to officially draw their borders. And that simple and accurate, truthful observation is one of the reasons Britain's Jewish lobby just dedicated themselves to preventing Corbyn from winning the leadership of the Labour Party. That they failed to do so indicates the power of the Jewish lobby is on the wane, not just in Great Britain, but even here in the United States of America. And they're pulling out all the stops. They're out there to reassert, we're in charge of the British government, we're in charge of the U.S. Congress, we're going to get them to wreck the Iran deal, no matter what it takes. Now, meanwhile, Israel's incursions into Al-Aqsa, which are continuing, are drawing international outcry and condemnation. Last week, a rocket was fired from somewhere in Gaza to, as always, an empty piece of dirt in Israel, and Israel responded with military strikes in Gaza and the West Bank. Even though no rockets came from the West Bank, just go and bomb them just for the heck of it. Meanwhile, Israel is negotiating with the U.S. over the U.S. government's payment to Israel for failure to obey Israel regarding the Iran P5+1 deal. And they're looking at a huge increase in your tax dollars flowing into Israel's government's pocket from $3.1 billion a year to $5 billion a year. That's an increase of 61%, according to Defense News. And Israel is demanding regional exclusivity on the F-35 aircraft. They want a promise from the United States that Israel will get the F-35 and no other country in the Middle East will be allowed to buy it to maintain Israel's qualitative military edge. Well, Israel's a nuclear-armed state. They don't need the F-35 for qualitative advantage. They know the F-35 is mostly a piece of junk anyway. But once Israel has the F-35, they are likely to reverse engineer the better technology in it, incorporate it into their own planes, and sell it to other nations, some of whom are not particularly friendly to the United States, because Israel has been caught doing that before. Taking these wonderful weapons from the United States, figuring out their secrets, and selling them. Because that's what Israel does with secrets they are entrusted with from the United States of America. Now, there's another article came out at carolmoore.net, which is reminding everybody of Israel's use of the term the Samson option, which is one of the ways in which Israel tacitly acknowledges it is a nuclear state and able to deliver nuclear weapons to any country that doesn't do what they're told. There was this one Israeli official literally said, if Europe doesn't do as they're told, Israel will nuke Europe. But, of course, if you say Israel has nuclear weapons, you're a dirty, Jew-hating, filthy anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens again. Now, Ann Coulter's tweet about the very obvious pandering by the GOP debate toward Israel, their obsessive focus on Israel, has really angered a lot of people, and Ann Coulter went public with it on Twitter. She's being denounced as an anti-Semite and a Jew-hater and the rest of it. But in this one case, she's absolutely right. The GOP candidates were tripping over themselves to prove how much they love Israel. How is this acceptable to the American people? And the answer is, it is not acceptable. And next year, I am calling on all the people of the United States of America to vote out all the Friends of Israel in the Congress in order to make way for Friends of America. Because that's what we need right now. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Mark in North Carolina, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I was watching, I think it was Greta Van Susteren yesterday. He had Donald Trump on.
Yep.
And,
hello? Are you there?
Yeah, I lost you for a second. Anyway, Donald Trump was saying that, he would kind of get along with Putin, and he said it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if Russia helped out Syria and they destroy ISIS. And if you remember the debate, he pretty much said the same thing. And then that evil witch from the West there, what's her name, colleague Irina,
yep,
came in and said how Putin was a gangster and she'd conduct all kinds of military operations there in the Baltic states and all of this stuff. This is the kind of stuff we got to make sure it doesn't get into the White House. I mean, Donald Trump seems to be much more level-headed, much more realistic. And I'm just wondering what the deal is with Syria, why we're so obsessed with Syria. Do you think that has anything to do with Israel, or pretty much Israel isn't involved in this at all?
Yes, Israel's involved in it. Israel wants to clear out that part of the Middle East for Eretz Israel, the Israel promised in the Bible from the Nile to the Euphrates, and they just
You mean they want to occupy Syria?
Yeah, they want to occupy all of it, from the Nile all the way to the Euphrates. I mean, that's been a big part of go ahead and Google Eratz Israel, E-R-A-T-Z, Israel, and you'll see it's an actual plan that Israel has. They think they should have the Israel that's described in the Old Testament.
But how come when you had the 6-Day War and the other war then, how come they just didn't occupy those places and keep it then, if that was the case?
Well, they tried to occupy them, but they weren't able to keep them. And, if at first you don't succeed, try again, and the rest of it. Okay, anything?
Was Syria considered part of Israel in the Bible?
The Eratz Israel overlaps part of Syria. You have to go and Google Eratz Israel, and you'll see the map of what they want the future Israel to be like. And yes, it includes huge amounts of lots of other people's countries. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Mark, and we'll be right back. Well, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And as usual, whenever Israel is starting to get aggressive against their neighbors, they're going to wag the Holocaust at us. And last we were talking about this 95, 96-year-old man. They're not even sure he can survive going to court, but they're going to put him on trial because he was in Germany during World War II, and therefore he bears the collective guilt for what was going on. And they found another one. I mean, they're desperate to find anybody they can put on Holocaust trials, and now they've got this 91-year-old German woman who is going to be brought up on 260,000 counts of accessory to murder because she operated a radio at the Auschwitz camp. That's how desperate they are. Remember, they took the guy who fed the dogs. They put him on trial. It's going to be the guy who cleans the toilets next. The guy who's in the warehouse handing out toothpaste and toothbrushes. They're going to put him on trial. This is pure wag the Holocaust, and we're all sick of it. And we're already hearing when they run out of actual leftover Germans who were alive during World War II, they're talking about prosecuting the children of all the Germans because obviously they reaped the benefit of what the Nazis did. I mean, it's just completely out of control. Remember the big fuss Israel made over that Polish treasure chain that they claimed they'd found up there in Poland was hidden in a tunnel? And Israel said immediately, everything on board belongs to us. We don't care what it is. It's ours because of reparation. And made a big huge furor about it, and then it turned out it was all a giant hoax anyway. It's amazing. Now, down in Greece, as you know, over the weekend, they had their elections. Rather surprisingly, the Syriza party won. Narrow margin, but they held on to their power. I'm rather shocked at that, given Syriza and Tsipras' betrayal of the Greek people. But the conservative leader finally conceded election defeat. And it's not going to change a darn thing. And I'm not the only person who's just scratching my head about this. Over at the IB Times, they're saying skepticism and anger in Greece as Alexis Tsipras prepares for his second term as leader. And it's not going to change a thing. The money junkies are going to demand what they're going to demand. Greece is not going to be able to pay it. Somewhere down the road, there's going to be a default and a derivative firestorm, and there's not a thing they can do about it. Unless they're willing to start talking about writing off Greece's debt. They're doing it in Ukraine. Poroshenko, he's out there, getting the war going everybody wants, so they're talking about writing off Ukraine's debt. Just take the ledger and the little red marker and poof, it's gone. They're not going to cut Greece that slack. They want to privatize Greece, want to buy it all up, rent it back to the Greek people, buy the Parthenon, ship it out to Las Vegas, put in front of one of Sheldon Adelson's casinos or something, as a sign of his power and preeminence here. By the way, I'm not the only person very concerned about the Pope's visit to the United States as a security risk. Even Susan Sarandon came on out and said she's very worried. The Pope could be assassinated. There could be an attempt on his life. And obviously with all this, you got to go hate the Muslims propaganda we're seeing all over both the corporate and even the independent media. If somebody shoots the Pope and frames some Muslim patsy for it, we're going to get the Christians and the Muslims to kill each other off and leave the planet Earth for Israel, which is going to backfire on them because who will pay retail? Now, getting on back to the Greek banks here, they're basically getting ready to flout Brussels' new rules regarding bail-ins. You know what a bail-in is? The owners of the bank get to steal from their own customers. Just dip into their savings accounts, checking accounts, safety deposit boxes. It's the rules. It's legal for us to take your money to cover up the mess that we and the government made. Well, that's the funny thing about law and legal, and we all need to keep something in mind here, because Hillary's still out there defending what she did, saying, oh, it's the letter of the law. Everything the Nazis did was the letter of the law. We all know that didn't make it right. The U.S. government is claiming their use of torture on people is the letter of the law, even though it violates the Constitution. We know that doesn't make it right. When the U.S. rounded up all the Japanese during World War II and put them in concentration camps, we were told that was the letter of the law. We know that wasn't right. Sitting up there and saying this is the law doesn't make it right, and it is up to you to decide whether it's right or not. Remember, on that Constitution, that is the contract with America, up at the top it says, we the people. That's the giveaway right there. This is our country. We make the rules. Government either follows the rules or have the decency to resign. Not just get up there and say, well, we've written this new law that says we can come in and slap you around and look through your home without a warrant and listen to all your phone calls and emails and steal your land for watershed. And, oh, we didn't need the watershed. We're going to sell it to a developer. And getting back to the Pope, obviously I made a mistake in my ordering on my talking points here. Article coming out of The Guardian, no less. Can Pope Francis clean up God's bank? This has been a big problem. And not just Pope Francis. This goes all the way back to Pope John Paul I, where the Vatican Bank was just scandalized, was tied in with money laundering and all kinds of illicit activity. One of the bankers wound up suicided underneath a bridge in London, England, just hanging. And Pope John Paul I tried to do something about it, and then died after drinking a very suspicious cup of tea. So Pope Francis, don't drink the tea. Just be cool. Now, the Spanish banks are out there warning that there will be a financial meltdown if Catalonia votes for independence. And it's another giant bluff, because the financial meltdown is not created by Catalonia wanting to go off and be independent. It might accelerate the bank meltdown if Catalonia's tax revenues are no longer there to be confiscated by the money junkies. But the financial meltdown is caused by private central banks that issue all the public currency of every nation as a loan at interest. It is an unstable system that creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt crushes the system. And we're on the verge of that right now. And Catalonia's independence isn't going to change that outcome one tiny bit. But the money junkies don't want to admit that they've been running this gigantic fraud on all of mankind for 300 plus years. Oh, it's all coming up. It's the fault of Catalonia. It's the fault of Russia. It's the fault of China. It's the Iranians. Go hate them. We're not the bad people. Yeah, they are. And the sooner everybody realizes that, I think the sooner we'll be looking at real solutions. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here and talking about the economy. The reality is, despite all the very positive talk about what's going on, we are in a serious mess here. The debt crisis is hitting the economy all across the globe. Massive unemployment. All the money is being concentrated in the hands of just a very few individuals. And that's not healthy. You can't sustain an entire national economy with all the wealth in the top 0.1%. Because there aren't enough of them to go on out and buy all the washing machines and TVs and cars and everything else that support a consumer-based economy. Now, Bernie Sanders is out there saying the top 0.1% in the U.S. have almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%, and he's close to being true there. And it was interesting, I was looking at the TV news earlier, and they were talking this story about how the Census Report has put out this map showing the household incomes of the entire nation, and some areas are a little red, and some areas are a little green, and it's a piece of propaganda to make it look like wealth inequality isn't a major problem in this country, even though it very clearly is. And the wealth isn't unequal across the general population. The wealth is unequal from the general population to the money junkies. Now, let's talk a little bit about this Volkswagen scandal. And it is a huge problem because Volkswagen was caught altering the software in their cars so that it would report lower emissions than were actually happening. Now, this is way beyond General Motors putting ignition switches in the car that were defective. This was intentionally done. And Volkswagen is facing up to $18 billion in fines from the Environmental Protection Agency. And it is a big stink. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. It took this long to uncover Volkswagen's cheat because the software in the Volkswagen's cars is protected by the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It is against the law for the owners of Volkswagens to look at the software that is running their cars. It was illegal for researchers from the EPA to look at that software because it's protected by the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. The software was shielded from Watchdog's investigation by the anti-circumvention provisions of the DMCA. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act is protecting the criminals. It's not helping us, the people. That's the irony there. Now, we are getting more news from the world of Obamacare. Apparently, the system is in serious economic trouble, along with all their software woes. And they're saying if they cannot enroll 21 million new members next year, it will collapse. The whole system will fall apart. Now, for those who have signed up for Obamacare, the costs for these Obamacare-compliant health insurance policies are so great, it has forced more American families onto food stamps. See, we've reached a very dangerous stage in the history of the economy of the United States of America, where everybody's out there grabbing money and grabbing more money, and we, the American people, have run out. Our wallets have become a battleground between these various vested interests who need more money to keep the Ponzi scheme going a little bit longer, whether it's the private central bankers, Obamacare, the coming carbon tax, Israel, military-industrial complex. Everyone's out serving their own particular agenda, and nobody is maintaining the overview that all of these overlapping exercises in rampant corporate political greed have emptied the pockets of the American people. We don't have any more to pay in, is what it comes down to. And I'm sure that all these money junkies are going to bed every night serene in the confidence that there's still vast amounts of untapped wealth out here in the hinterland. They just have to figure out a way to take it away from us, and all will be well. No, it's not going to work that way. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call. Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk to you about Russia and their plan to go into Syria to fight ISIS. Now, in essence, wouldn't they just be fighting the U.S. mercenaries?
Well, see, the U.S. doesn't want to admit that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are mercenaries for the U.S., even though even the corporate media is now acknowledging the ISIS leaders have been trained and funded by the U.S. at least as late as 2013.
So it's a proxy war.
Yeah, it's a proxy war, just like Saudi Arabia is doing the proxy war in Yemen on behalf of the United States.
Now, you mentioned the other day that Germany is possibly coming in to help Russia as well, and possibly France.
Yeah, that's a significant pivot away from the United States. And the reason for that is France and Germany and probably the rest of Europe understand that the end of this U.S. confrontation with Russia is a new world war, whether it starts in Syria or starts in Ukraine, and it will be fought on their front doorstep, and they've already been through that twice, and they don't feel like they should go through that again.
it seems like this whole New World Order is really blowing up in their face.
Yes, it is. It is. It's already failed. And unfortunately, they're convinced that they've gone so far, they can't turn around, so they're out there, victory or death, as long as it's other people's death.
I wish that we had Putin as a leader compared to
Well,
these
thankfully, we've got at least one Putin, and yes, he's in Russia, but he is trying to keep this thing tamped down.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people around the world see him as a strong leader as opposed to the U.S. now.
We see him as a statesman. I don't want to put the word strong leader on him because he's not flexing Russia's muscles all that much. He's definitely a statesman, and Putin certainly deserves the Nobel Peace Prize a heck of a lot more than Obama does.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Mike, I was just wondering about the whole thing.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now then, getting on to our campaign season here, Bill Maher apparently has uncorked on Donald Trump, calling Trump, it was trying to equate Trump to Adolf Hitler. And, I mean, that's how scared, the establishment is just as scared of Donald Trump here in the U.S. as they are of Jeremy Corbyn over there in Great Britain. You can just see the panic that's happening. Bill Maher also devoted a portion of his program to defending the school's actions in the arrest of Ahmed Mohammed for the crime of building a digital clock. And they're out there still trying to save this story here. Even Sarah Palin came out and said, well, Ahmed should have known better than to bring any electronics to school because, after all, he's a Muslim and we know all the Muslims are evil. The Ahmed Mohammed story has underscored the fact that a lot of this Muslim bashing we're seeing is a witch hunt. I even got an email from somebody saying Ahmed Mohammed wanted to build a hoax bomb. He just didn't do a very good job of it. He left off the sticks of dynamite and C4, but he wanted a hoax bomb. He wanted to terrorize because he's a Muslim. And they're trying to hold this thing together because people are waking up and realizing that all of this Muslim bashing propaganda is just as vile and evil as the Nazis' Jew bashing propaganda in Germany in World War II. It's a repeat of the same exact mechanism. And people are saying, are the Muslims really that bad? Did they really do all these things? Were they really behind 9/11? And they're starting to doubt. And doubt is the most powerful weapon we have against tyranny. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about this propaganda story with Ahmed Mohammed. And it has a happy ending in that his parents have now pulled him and his sister out of the public school, and they're probably going to send him to private school. And as well they should. And what's amazing is how hard the Muslim bash propagandists are trying to get ahead of this story. By the way, another little development in public schools. Apparently Common Core it has set up a communication mechanism with Child Protective Services. CPS is now in the Common Core schools and curriculum to keep an eye on your kids, to look for any kind of an excuse to take the kids away from the parents. We, the government, will raise the children because we know what is best for them to think and know and feel, like hate the Muslims and be ready to go to war and so forth and so on. Now, Scott Walker has bowed out of the presidential campaign over the weekend. He is no longer in the running, so that's another one down. We're starting the shakeout here. Now, Carly Fiorina is doing very well in the polls. She's raising in the polls, and it's got the Hillary Clinton campaign struggling to shed the insider label, because it is very clear from the recent election in Great Britain, it's very clear from the poll numbers here, that Americans don't want any more insiders. They don't want any more establishment. They don't want any more friends of Israel. This is going to be the year of the Mavericks. And all of the outsider candidates are doing much, much better in the polls than the insiders. And Hillary's trying to figure out some way that she can convince America that despite a lifetime inside the system, going all the way back to her very aborted tenure on the Watergate Committee, that she's really an outsider, just like everybody else. And how they think they're going to convince anybody of that is a mystery, but that's their latest change to the Hillary campaign. We're introducing Hillary version 4.2, the outsider. Now, over at Investment Watch blog, Ron Fournier is observing how the Clinton campaign is trying to get around the email scandal by saying that trust doesn't matter in elections, which is one of the most absurd things I have ever heard. Because every candidate gets up there saying, I am promising you all this stuff, and I need you to trust that I will keep those promises, because if you don't trust them, why would you vote for them? And yet the Clinton campaign is out there saying, no, it's not about trust. It's about the message. It's about, Hillary's message about, victims of sexual abuse, and they have a right to be heard and be believed, unless they're the trailer trash sluts that my husband picked on. But a message without trust is absolutely null and void. Now, getting on back to Carly, who was being promoted as a challenger for Hillary's ambition to be the first female president of the United States of America. There are some things starting to surface in her background that don't look very good at all. In fact, much of her legend, of her rise from secretary to CEO, seems to be manufactured. And there are some emerging connections between Carly and the nation's intelligence agencies as well. But all you really need to know about Carly Fiorina was her experience as the chief executive officer of the Hewlett-Packard Corporation. And basically during her tenure, up until she was fired, she shaved off $60 billion in destroyed value in 5 years' time. More than $10 billion in losses per year. Even for a politician, that is horrendous losses. She's not a good CEO. And she's running on that. Now, everybody is getting on Ben Carson's case, and I think they should, because he came out with this comment that Islam is incompatible with U.S. laws and we should never have a Muslim president. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, under our system, religion and government are kept separate. That's the first part that Carson doesn't seem to remember. Religion is not allowed to have a role in the civil government. Second of all, I'd like to turn you history buffs back to Pope Leo VIII, who declared that Christianity is not compatible with the United States Constitution. In fact, Pope Leo VIII declared the Bill of Rights should never have been written because God does not give to man freedom of thought, action, and speech. So, under Ben Carson's thinking, no Christian should be allowed to be president. You can see where this is going. It was an absurd statement for him to make. Now, getting on down to Hillary's email server woes, it just gets worse and worse and worse. Article over at Boiling Frogs report. The Dennis Hastert case, the Clinton scandals, FBI, and the 1996 COINTELPRO directive. And this article is going back to when Bill Clinton was president, 1996. The scandals were already starting to pile up. And Bill Clinton issued a classified White House order to the FBI to revive the COINTELPRO program of the 1960s, which almost delegitimized the entire U.S. government when it was exposed. And you need to keep that in mind because of a new development. A month ago, the FBI was acknowledging they had Hillary's server, they were investigating it, they were examining it, they were looking into what was going on. Today, the FBI has put up the stone wall. They are refusing to cooperate with the court review of Hillary's emails. They're refusing to confirm or deny even if there's an investigation. And we have members of Congress saying the FBI is now acting like they think they're above the law. We have other articles. FBI refuses to cooperate in Hillary Clinton email server probe. And I predicted this was going to happen. We know the FBI was protecting the Clintons all the way back to the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. They were the ones who destroyed my career in Hollywood all the way back then. And if for no other reason than Hillary can blackmail them over their cover-up of the murder of Vincent Foster, I expected the FBI to go along and protect them one more time, and that is exactly what they're doing. And for the FBI and the Department of Justice to be stonewalling this hard absolute blank wall, nothing more, suggests my concerns about the combination of the weak private server and the charitable foundation were valid. The FBI may have started looking into the email server and stumbled onto what may be the biggest spy scandal in U.S. history, with the weak private server delivering the secrets of the United States and, as it turns out, the United Nations, and the Clinton Charitable Foundation collecting and laundering the payments. If this is true, and it certainly seems that way from the way the FBI and the Department of Justice are circling the wagons, this scandal goes way beyond Hillary Clinton herself and discredits the entire federal government. Like the truth behind 9/11, the truth behind the Kennedy assassinations, this is a secret that even Hillary's worst enemies will work to keep hidden. Otherwise, it's going to wreck the fun times for everyone. Now, the judge in this case is yelling at the State Department because the State Department is stalling delivery of the emails, saying that they were delivered as paper copies. They don't have enough people to process them. It's just going to take forever for this to happen, probably until after election next year. The judge said to the State Department, you hire more people. You get this stuff out here. It's a nasty, nasty scandal. Andrew in New York, aloha, real quick before the news break, what's on your mind?
Hi, it looks like they're promoting Carly Fiorina to go after Trump. Like, she's kind of controlled candidate. Like, she says Benjamin Netanyahu is my friend and all that.
Well, she's got a long way to go after Trump, but they're definitely ganging up on Trump. Now they're saying, oh, this flash in the pan is over. The poll numbers are against him. They did one poll showing that Carly was gaining on Trump, but if you look at the actual demographics of the pollsters, they were cherry-picking the people that they talked to try and generate that. My worst nightmare is Joe Biden with Hillary as VP versus Trump with Carly as VP. And so, and I'm still going to go with Trump. I do not want Hillary as the vice president because that would put a target on Joe Biden's back right from day one. We got to take a break for our top of the hour news. Thank you for the phone call, Andrew, and we will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. Tom is still sitting in our control room, hand hovering over the telephone, ready to swoop on down and put you on the air with your comments and questions. Now, getting on to the immigrant crisis, which is already being exploited by everybody for every political agenda out there. Over in Hungary, they have really had enough of it. They're trying to close their border, which is their right as a sovereign independent nation. Hungary has now authorized the army to intervene in the migration crisis. They're already out there with rubber bullets and tear gas trying to close the border. And that is their right to do that. Hungary has passed a law allowing the army to use stun grenades, rubber bullets, tear gas. The crisis has gotten so bad, a German rail operator has suspended services to and from Austria and Hungary. It's completely out of control. Now, here's where it gets interesting. 4 out of every 5 refugees are not from Syria. They're basically hopping on board and taking advantage of the open borders to get to someplace they think life is going to be better, and I understand that instinct. But the European Union logged 213,000 refugee arrivals in April, May, and June. Only 44,000 of them were fleeing the Syrian civil war. Now, over in Germany, the Social Democratic mayor of Jena, Albrecht Schroeder, is saying Israel is to blame for the Syrian refugee crisis because of their intervention and support of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And, of course, immediately the German media said he's an anti-Semite, he's an anti-Semite, he's an anti-Semite, he's an anti-Semite, and blah, 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 blah. Don't you get sick of that? After a while, that's Israel's answer to everything. Oh, you're being an anti-Semite Jew hater, that's it. We don't need to answer your question. And remember, Amy Goodman had that former member of the Knesset on her show, Democracy Now!, and the former member of the Knesset said, yeah, it's a trick. When somebody asks a question that Israel cannot answer, they just shout anti-Semite to get them to go away. Only it doesn't work anymore because they've used it so much. Nobody cares anymore. It's lost its shock value. Now, in the realm of propaganda, they are thrashing around right now because there's this new group, the Poynter Institute, that is trying to set itself up and promote itself as the global online fact-checking network, sort of Snopes on steroids. And they're setting themselves up. If you wonder if something over at WhatReallyHappened.com is true or not, you come check with the Poynter Institute. The only problem is the Poynter Institute works hand in glove with the Gannett newspaper chain. And Kawika Riley, who's a fellow of the Poynter Institute, works with the Department of Homeland Security. There are other links between this Poynter Institute and the Central Intelligence Agency. It's another gatekeeper. Oh, you can trust us to tell you what to believe on the Internet. No thanks, we'll make up our own mind. Still trying to find out what happened to that $8.5 trillion of your money that went into the Pentagon budget that nobody seems to know where it went. We know there were a couple of big lumps. Donald Rumsfeld, when he was Secretary of Defense, had to get up and admit the Pentagon had lost $3 trillion of your money, couldn't account for it. This was on September 10th, 2001. Should have been the economic corruption scandal of the decade, but fortunately for Donald, just 24 hours later, 9/11 happened and the corporate media completely forgot about all that missing tax money. But since 1996, $8.5 trillion with a T has vanished into the Pentagon, and nobody knows where it went. Went somewhere. Now, as you know, we're coming up here in a couple of months on yet another anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas, and more articles are coming out tying the assassination to his Executive Order 11110 in his attempt to wrest the American people away from the slavery of the private central banks. And again, you need to remember, assassinations, like wars, never happen for just one reason. When you have a group of conspirators who have their own agendas, but the solution to that agenda overlaps with a particular action, the action is going to happen. Now, John F. Kennedy, apparently when he got into that White House, it affected him, and he just decided he was going to do the job the way he thought it should be done, rather than simply pander to all of his backers and supporters. And he angered a lot of people. His pulling the plug on the Bay of Pigs angered the Central Intelligence Agency. His subsequent firing of Alan Dulles angered them even more. The Texas oil billionaires were furious with Kennedy over the oil depletion allowance. Organized crime thought Kennedy had betrayed them because they had helped him with his election, only to have Robert Kennedy appointed Attorney General going after organized crime. The Federal Reserve hated John F. Kennedy because of Executive Order 11110, and Israel hated Kennedy because he was adamant Israel not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons. But with regard to the link with the Federal Reserve, you need to remember, the Warren Commission was formed at a time when the federal government did not actually have legal jurisdiction. It was formed to head off all the investigations in Texas and New Orleans, grab all the evidence to itself, and craft the official story of a crazed, lone nut, former CIA asset working at a books depository in Dallas, Texas. And on that Warren Commission sat John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank. And I don't care how good a banker he is, he's not qualified to investigate the murder of a president. So we may presume, logically, he was on the Warren Commission to make sure the link between Kennedy's assassination and the United States note, which was taken out of circulation as soon as Kennedy was killed, was never revealed to you, the public. Now then, over the weekend, there was this story that was put out about how a 47-car railroad train vanished up in Canada. A lot of people picked it up and carried it as straight news. It turned out it was a supposedly satirical report from a Canadian radio show. And it was supposedly poking fun at National Canadian Rail, which is a hive of inefficiency. But apparently the fact that it was a satire escaped a lot of people. So no, they didn't misplace a train up there. Let's talk about computers and computer software, especially in the wake of the Skype failure yesterday, the Amazon Web Service, Twitter before that. Apparently hundreds of millions of iPhone users are at risk because the Apple Store has been hacked and malicious code found in some of the most popular applications you can download from the official Apple Store. Where is the NSA with all of this? No, they're not there. Can't do a thing about it. Meanwhile, Jeb Bush is saying, we shouldn't demonize the National Security Agency. They're doing something good with all that money in constitutional violations. We just don't know what it is. Michigan has sued Hewlett-Packard because there was this $49 million upgrade. Hewlett-Packard came in and actually turned out to be a complete total disaster. They're calling it 1960s mainframe heck. And apparently this contract was signed 10 years ago. Gee, I wonder who was running Hewlett-Packard back then. And it was never completed. And the goal was to replace Michigan's mainframe system with new computers in 131 offices, and it never completed. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about computers and software and spying and all that goes with that. I got an email from Autodesk the other day announcing the end of perpetual licenses sales. And what that basically means, they're moving to a new model of services and software as a monthly rental. Now, in the good old days, you'd buy a piece of software, you'd bring it home, put it on your computer, and that was kind of the end of it. Some of the high-end animation software is sold on a yearly license basis. But Autodesk has basically said from now on, any of their products that you want to use, you have to rent month to month to month to month. Which, assuming you have a computer that lasts a decent amount of time, you're going to wind up over the long haul paying a lot more than you would have for the perpetual licenses. But they're just trying to get more and more money. And presumably, we're going back to the 1960s, 1970s models of computing, where all your software and data is on giant corporate-owned, government-surveilled mainframes, and your computer in your hand is little more than a terminal. And if there's one lesson we should all be looking at from the failure of Skype yesterday, the Amazon Web Service before that, Twitter before that, is when we are forced to be dependent on centralized services, we are vulnerable. Hackers just need to take down those central services and everybody's shut off. It reminds me of a production company I knew in Hollywood. And I guess I can name them Digital Productions, because they're long gone. They were the company that did The Last Starfighter, which was absolute, state-of-the-art when it came out. And Digital Productions it got a great deal of press off the fact that they owned a Cray supercomputer. And it was on prominent display at Digital Productions. The problem being, everything went through that Cray. And it had two problems. First of all, it wouldn't run the C programming language, which at that point in history, 99% of all computer animation code was written in C. So they incurred a huge expense recoding everything into Fortran. Second, every time that Cray went down, and it went down a lot, everybody got to go home. And ultimately, Digital Productions collapsed for financial reasons. Now, if you go to any modern computer animation company, whether it's Weta or Industrial Light and Magic, they don't have big, giant computers. They have rooms full of little, tiny machines operating in parallel so that if one machine stops working, everybody keeps on trucking. Everybody's still animating on their workstations. Everybody's still working on texture maps, and the render farm keeps on rendering. Maybe not quite as fast, but it's still rendering. When you are dependent on a single resource and it stops, everything shuts down. It's a very foolish way to deal with the reliability of the system as a whole. But if you are a money junkie and you're trying to force everybody's dependent on your owned platform, yeah, it makes monetary sense. But it leaves us wide open for serious disruptions of service, intentional or just out of outright stupidity. Now, there's another story coming out of Investment Watch blog. The Washington Post has reported on a leaked National Security Council memo on encryption. And the upshot of it is the U.S. government has finally accepted they're not going to be able to force the rest of the world to use U.S.-defined and NSA backdoored systems of encryption. Now they're trying to embark on a policy of encouraging voluntary cooperation, and that's not going to work either. Because everybody knows anything coming out of the United States, hardware, software, firmware, services, it's all backdoored by the National Security Agency, and nobody wants their secrets stolen by the U.S. government, especially if you've got, potentially Hillary selling it all to another country in exchange for a donation. Now, the government of India has financed the development of their own domestic operating system. It is a replacement for Microsoft Windows. It's called BOSS. And it's already passed its initial testing. It's being put into use in Indian government offices. And we're going to see this. We're going to see the fall of Apple and of Microsoft as more and more countries fund the development of their own domestic operating systems in order to protect their secrets from prying American eyes. Now, we're getting another story out of Sputnik News where we're starting to hear warnings about how the 2016 U.S. election could melt down because all of these electronic voting machines, they're so old and outdated. They're 15 years old. They're past their life expectancies. And what is really going on here, besides an attempt to get everybody to buy brand new rigged election machines, they're already setting up explanations for what is probably going to be one of the crookedest elections in U.S. history, and they're already out there getting, yeah, so this candidate got minus 17,000 votes. Well, it's just because the machine is old and wore out. So they're already out there trying to create a propaganda excuse for why we're going to see bizarre results coming out of these electronic voting machines. We need to go back to paper ballots, counting at the local level, all results posted all the way along from bottom to top in order to verify it. As long as we have these electronic machines and counting in secrets, our elections are absolutely untrustworthy. And in my opinion, if the government cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt the accuracy, honesty, and fairness of the elections by which it claims authority over us, then we the people are neither legally nor morally obligated to obey that government's dictates, to pay its bills, and certainly not sacrifice life and limb of our children in these wars of conquest. Now, over in Great Britain, as you know, they banned guns not too long ago, and to nobody's surprise, violent crime increased because the criminals who still have their guns know that ordinary Brits are not able to defend themselves anymore. Well, apparently, as guns do tend to trend downward in Great Britain, knife murders are skyrocketing. And so now Great Britain has an answer for that. Ban knives. You don't really need a knife in your pocket. Just turn them all in here. Then it'll be turning in the cricket bats and the beer mugs, hand tools, pea shooters, anything made of glass or metal, and finally mandatory amputation of your hands. And only then will the money junkies feel really safe from the wrath of the people from whom they have drawn so much plunder and loot. It's just absolutely insane. Now, knives. They want to ban knives. That's ridiculous. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. And speaking of piracy, apparently Saturday at the JFK airport, a TSA agent actually got caught stealing money out of a passenger's wallet at the security checkpoint. TSA guy just helped himself to $61 out of this passenger's wallet. The passenger spotted what had happened and filed a complaint. And, of course, with all those security cameras around there, they had video of this TSA guy just helping himself to people's money as they go through. Now, you know those TSA-approved locks that you must buy and use on your luggage so the TSA can get in there and steal anything they want whenever they want? And supposedly they offer you protection against people not authorized to be in your luggage. Well, it turns out they don't, because the universal keys that fit all those locks have been copied by other criminals, and apparently there are even files for them for people with 3D printers. They can print out their own copy of a TSA key. The TSA was appraised of the situation, and the TSA's attitude is, well, we're not going to change the system. We really don't care one way or the other. As long as we can get in your luggage, that's all that matters. Might as well not bother putting locks on there at all, which may be what they wanted. And I'm sure if you travel a lot, like I used to, you've had stuff taken out of your luggage by the security people. Locals in Great Britain call Heathrow Airport Thiefrow because of the high amount of thievery going on there. But because their union is so strong, they can't even fire the people they catch stealing. Took a Walkman out of my luggage. Now then, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Anthony in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just had a question. To me, what's confusing me is how welcoming Vladimir Putin is to Netanyahu. You know, when I look at what's going on in Ukraine, I look at all the oligarchs that are dual Israeli citizens. You know, you got Bersovsky, you got Pinchuk. These guys are both Israeli citizens. They're really pushing. They really pushed the coup in Ukraine. And, you know, to me, you got Victoria Nuland, who, you know, was one of the forefronters of pushing the coup in Ukraine as well. So when I look at it, I think Israel's a big part of what's going on Ukraine. The main reason is they don't like Putin is because Putin is really preventing Israel from having hegemonic power in the Middle East right now. So I just wanted to ask you, what's your opinion on how much Israel's involved in Ukraine? And two, you know, what's Putin thinking, even thinking that Netanyahu has any respect for him at all? So I wanted to get your opinion on that.
Well, I don't think Putin has much respect for Netanyahu at all. I don't think anybody respects him. They just understand that he's very, very dangerous. And he still has a tremendous amount of control over the politics of Europe, and the politics of the United States of America. And Netanyahu basically announced, I'm going to Russia to talk to Putin. And, you know, Putin took the meeting as opposed to refusing him would have given Israel propaganda leverage to say, oh, Russia doesn't even want to talk to us. He's an anti-Semite. He's a Jew hater. But basically Netanyahu was out there trying to convince Putin not to give weapons to Syria because Syria was going to turn around and attack Israel with them. And Putin basically blew Netanyahu off, saying, Syria's got other problems. They're not going to be attacking you. And Putin may have also mentioned that, you know, if Israel is worried about Syria attacking them, Israel probably ought to stop trying to steal the Golan Heights and arming and funding Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. You know, Israel's problems are of their own making, but Israel has this habit of going around the world, causing problems, and then saying, you have to fix this problem for me. They've already got that deal with the United States. Israel's talking about attacking Iran, but if Iran counterattacks, the U.S. is expected to step in and protect Israel. And I think the world is getting really sick and tired of Israel at this point.
Well, and Europe is dealing with the refugee crisis from the Middle East as well. So
right, and they're seeing that as the fault of the United States. Germany says it's caused by Israel. Nobody is fooled by the propaganda any longer. And that's why this push for a new world war, you know, it's already a failed policy because everybody knows what's going on.
No, fair enough. So just directly in regards to Ukraine, how much you think Israel's involved in that, the whole Ukraine coup? How much you think that the Israel factor plays into that part?
I think they're definitely there and involved, and they're looking at an opportunity. First of all, the goal was to bring Ukraine into the European Central Bank model, and the ultimate goal is the entire planet enslaved to a single private central bank, so that humanity spends the rest of its existence in permanent debt slavery. It's a new serfdom, a new feudalism, and that has been the goal of the private central bankers trying to build that empire for the last 300 years.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you. We're going to let you go. Now then, as you know, we had a huge earthquake in Chile, had a bit of a tsunami warning here. It didn't really affect us all that much, thankfully. But there's continuing seismic activity in that area further on down the coast. A lot of people concerned we may be seeing a period of elevated seismic activity all along the eastern edge of the Pacific tectonic plate. And it's something that was actually predicted all the way back with the big Japan quake, because we started seeing the entire plate readjusting, and we saw increased quake activity moving north and south from Japan, then across the Arctic and Antarctic, and now it seems to be rattling the west coast of the Americas, so we're going to be keeping an eye on that. Speaking of keeping an eye on that, Hawaii has yet another tropical storm forming up just to the southeast of the Big Island, and they're predicting 70% chance of that one turning into a major storm. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that. We've had just this outrageous storm season this summer. Now then, interesting article out of Investment Watch blog. Scientists who are being funded by the global warming hoaxsters are now asking Obama to prosecute global warming skeptics. I mean, this is right out of the Inquisition and Galileo. If you don't believe as we tell you to believe, we are going to use the force of the courts against you, which is a dead giveaway. They know they're a fraud. Truth does not need laws to reinforce it. Truth survives re-examination and questioning. Only when the promoters of an idea know that they are promoting a falsehood do they resort to the threat of legal action and jail to enforce adherence to their dogma. Now, another story has come out. Once again, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration has been caught altering temperature data, presumably in anticipation of the big United Nations climate change meeting. And NOAA justifies it, saying it's statistical adjustment, it's seasonal correction, we have to blah, 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 blah. And what they do is they take temperature data that shows the Earth is cooling, and magically it comes out showing the Earth is warming, and they go on in and say, we have to have carbon controls now. In fact, their motto is climate neutral now. We have to have a carbon tax now. And the rush is on because we're heading into another brutal winter. And the global warming hoax is not going to survive another brutal winter. So if Obama's going to get his carbon taxation now, he's got to do it before the first heavy snows really settle on in. Now, here's what's interesting. NASA has come out saying that atmospheric carbon dioxide actually acts as a coolant because it absorbs the sun's heat and re-radiates the vast majority of it back out into space. So even the theoretical foundation for carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas has been absolutely destroyed. But still, global warming is bad. Carbon dioxide is the cause of it. You are to blame and you must pay for it. Meanwhile, going back, looking through Google, we find all these stories about snow in the United States in July and August that never got reported by the corporate media. And we do have a list of it posted to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to our program. Last segment of our show today here on this Tuesday. And again, a reminder, we didn't have a show yesterday because of the Skype outage, but Skype has behaved for this program today, so we're good on that. Getting on back to human-caused global warming. Carbon dioxide levels have been increasing, which is why all of these record-setting winters are hammering home the point that climate is not controlled by carbon dioxide, certainly not by human-produced carbon dioxide. It's controlled by solar output and the changing shape of the Earth's orbit and various other factors. But there is a noticeable result of the increasing carbon dioxide. Africa's deserts are beginning to regreen. And people who are living on the edges of these deserts are all of a sudden finding their lifestyle is improving. There's food growing outside their doors. They don't have to go to a supermarket to buy it. Meanwhile, we're seeing record sea ice growth continuing up in the Arctic. Corporate media is still out there trying to say, oh, it's the lowest ice ever. I mean, the lies are just that blatant. 2015, the hottest year on record, once we're done tinkering with the numbers here. Now, there's a new scandal brewing, and it has to do with this hedge fund manager buying the rights to a drug, Daraprim. And jumping the price from $13.50 to $750 overnight. That's a 5,500% increase. It's a 60-year-old cancer drug. It's questionable whether it should still be protected by patent. And it's triggered a major outcry. And apparently there's been a second drug. Relatively inexpensive, rights were bought, price shot through the roof. Is this rampant greed by the medical industrial complex? Well, we know they're greedy, but there are other drugs that do the same thing. Pricing the drug at $750 means it's not going to sell. People are going to go to the lower cost alternatives. But this is a crisis that has popped up just when our candidates for president next year need something to talk about that isn't the email server or Black Lives Matter or anything else. It feels to me like this is being done to get the issue back onto affordable health care, at which the Democrats can campaign against the GOP. Meanwhile, we're seeing more and more reports from all over the world. This latest polio vaccine is triggering a worldwide surge in childhood paralysis. Now, for the longest time, they were calling it non-polio paralysis. Now they're acknowledging the vaccine has a problem. Now, the polio vaccine, like so many others, works by taking an attenuated virus, where they take the disease-causing organism, they slap it around, hit it over the head with a bar bottle, bruise it up, and the idea is it's injected into your body along with adjuvants, which are chemicals designed to provoke an immune response, to just sort of make sure the body really notices it's there. And then in theory, the body develops antibodies, and you are now protected from the illness. The problem with attenuated pathogen vaccines is the pathogen can revert to full potency inside the body, and this has happened on many occasions. That's why so many of these vaccine campaigns seem to trigger epidemics of the disease being vaccinated against, whether it's measles, mumps, and now polio. In the case of the polio, there's an added problem. The attenuated pathogen is not only reverting to full potency, it's mutating in the process to a new form of polio for which there is no vaccine. And that means a whole new polio epidemic all over the globe. All in the name of pharmaceutical profits. Meanwhile, the Australian government is pushing their no jab, no pay program. Parents of unvaccinated children will not be allowed to receive child care benefits, and under the Australian system, people are dependent on the government for child care benefits. And you will get your needle stuck. More concerns being raised around the world about HPV, Gardasil causing damage. Apparently one of the scientists who helped create Gardasil, in her last public speech to a convention, surprised everybody by doing a 180 saying, this was wrong. We've harmed people. And then, of course, immediately resigned her position. Now, here's where it gets really out of control. Out in California, as you know, there is this new law where if you do not have the proper vaccines, you're not allowed to get an education in California. And here's where it gets weird. Apparently, one California school has kicked a 7th grader out of an online course being studied from home. That's how ridiculous this is and how obvious it is. We're hearing another scandal from GlaxoSmithKline published a flawed study which led to millions of children being wrongly prescribed dangerous antidepressants. This was about paroxetine, sold under the name Paxil, which turns up time and again in all these researches about antidepressants and suicides and murders. And now, apparently, there is a scientific study out, published in PLOS Medicine Journal, that has discovered young people taking antidepressants are more likely to commit acts of violence And the way they did the study is they studied these kids before they were on the antidepressants and while they were on the antidepressants and after they stopped taking the antidepressants. And they found a clear correlation. Another study that we've got up on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, linking antidepressants to suicidal behavior. Over at Telesurf TV, they have a story that the latest study is showing people in the United States hate Big Pharma. Gee, you think? The pharmaceutical industry is one of the most loathed sectors in the United States, sitting alongside big oil and the federal government itself. Now, you've probably been seeing all over the supermarket, gluten-free this, gluten-free that, gluten is bad for you, gluten blah, 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 blah. Well, apparently, gluten got scapegoated for skyrocketing rates of celiac disease, which have now been traced to the fact that American wheat is doused with Roundup, glyphosate, just before harvest in order to make it look better. Puff it up. That's the way American pharmaceutical industries work. Put out a product, it's killing people. Oh, we'll blame something else. GMO pollen seems to be killing off the honeybees. Well, we'll blame the microwave cell phone towers, mites and other stuff here. Pass the blame, make the money. And the federal government, which is supposed to be watching out for the benefit of the people and the nation as a whole, which takes our tax money under the excuse that they're watching out for our welfare, looks the other way. Another document has surfaced from inside Monsanto, another leaker, proving that Monsanto knew glyphosate has problems. It affects health. And apparently the EPA has been implicated as sitting on Monsanto's own data for decades, saying Roundup is safe, glyphosate is safe, really, you can have it. And the EPA knew and did nothing about it because the EPA is on Monsanto's side. They're not on your side. No government agency is on your side. We live in a fascist economic dictatorship, and fascism is defined as the government and corporate interests aligned together against the general population. And that's not my definition. That comes from Benito Mussolini, who won the Olympic gold medal for being a fascist dictator jerk. There's the music. Time for Claire and I to get out of here and get some errands done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Wednesday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices, share what you know with everyone that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.